She walked into the diner on a Tuesday, jeans cuffed over a prosthetic leg, silent stares trailing every step. No one offered kindness. Not the waitress who seated her near the kitchen, not the teens who whispered about her robot leg, not the men who mocked her veteran status out loud. She didn't speak, just placed a faded marine patch on the table and waited. What happened next would shatter the silence, flip the entire room, and spark a movement that would ripple across the country, starting from booth 6. This wasn't just a meal, it was a reckoning. She didn't look like a soldier. Not to the men sitting in the corner booth at Jimmy's diner. Not to the 2 teenagers at the counter with milkshakes and smirks. Not to the waitress who gave her that tight-lipped smile that meant, "I'll seat you where no one can see you." She walked in on a Tuesday afternoon, her silhouette catching the sun just right through the window. One step, then a pause. Then the slow, quiet swing of the prosthetic. Left, click, right, click. The sound echoed just enough to draw glances. Not kind ones. She wore jeans cuffed high over the carbon fiber and titanium. Her jacket was plain. Her face unreadable. A black backpack slung over one shoulder, American flag patch stitched at the top. No makeup, no flair, just presence. The waitress waved her toward the back. Booths open near the kitchen. She nodded and moved without complaint, every step careful, not because she was unsure, but because the world around her still was. When she sat, the booth groaned under her weight, like it had something to say about her being there. She ignored it. The 2 teens near the counter whispered and laughed. "Did you see it?" one said. "Straight up robot leg. Think she lost it in Iraq or something? Probably tripped over a rock." They laughed again. Not loud, but loud enough. She opened the menu and stared at it without reading. The waitress returned, pen in hand, notepad out. "You ready to order, sweetie?" She hated that word. "Coffee black and eggs scrambled. No toast." The waitress nodded and walked away. Behind her, the men in the corner booth kept staring. 3 of them. Truckers or warehouse guys. Big voices, bigger opinions. They watched her like she was something they couldn't figure out how to categorize. Not young, not old, not broken enough to pity, not whole enough to respect. One leaned in and said it loud enough for everyone to hear. "Bet she parks in the veterans' space, too." The others snorted. She didn't flinch, but her hand tightened around the edge of the table, fingernails digging into cheap, laminated wood. She didn't come here for pity. She came for peace, for coffee that burned and eggs that filled, for 15 minutes of stillness before heading back to the rehab center to help other vets who didn't know how to walk through towns like this yet. Another laugh, another whisper. Probably got discharged because she couldn't keep up. Her jaw clenched. She'd heard worse, in combat zones, in locker rooms, in VA waiting rooms that smelled like bleach and sadness. But this one stung differently because no one was saying anything. Not the waitress, not the owner, not the customers pretending not to hear. Just silence, the kind that slices deeper than words ever can. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small patch, faded, folded, frayed. Tossed it gently on the table beside her coffee. It read, U.S. Marines, 2nd Recon. And still no one said a word, until the bell above the diner door jingled, and everything changed. The door opened with a soft chime. 3 men stepped in, boots polished, collars straight. Marine dress uniforms so crisp they looked like they'd just stepped out of a recruitment poster. They didn't speak at first, didn't scan the room. They didn't need to. They saw her immediately, and she saw them. There was a flicker in her eyes. Recognition, not of names, but of posture, of bearing, of shared weight. They walked in tandem, like muscle memory pulled them forward together. The waitress blinked, straightened. "Table for 3?" One of them shook his head. "We're sitting with her." Gasps weren't audible, but the shift in the room was. The boys at the counter went silent. The men in the corner booth froze. The waitress hesitated, glanced at the owner, who shrugged with his mouth open but said nothing. The Marines walked to her booth without asking. The tallest, with salt and pepper hair and ribbons stacked like a ledger of pain, spoke first. "You mind?" She looked up. "No." They slid in, two on one side, one beside her. She didn't ask how they found her. She already knew. The patch had been a signal, a quiet call home. The Marine on her right spoke next. "You're Staff Sergeant Evans, right?" She nodded. "Retired." "Third tour?" She nodded again. "Fallujah, Kabul, Marja." He tapped the table lightly, like he was taking roll. "Heard about you." The man across from her added, "We all did." They didn't talk about the leg. They didn't need to. She straightened slightly, shoulders pulled back, chin lifted, not defiant, just steady. The Marine on her left turned to the waitress. "Coffee for the table, and whatever she's having, we'll cover it." The waitress nodded, her pen trembling slightly. The man in the corner booth scoffed. "What, they're here for her?" The tallest Marine turned his head slowly. "You got something to say about it?" Silence, utter and complete. Then the man looked down at his plate, suddenly interested in runny eggs. One of the teens at the counter quietly closed his phone. Another customer whispered, "They're with her?" She smiled for the first time since sitting down. The Marine beside her leaned in. "We saw the video." She stiffened. "You weren't supposed to. I didn't post it. You didn't need to. Someone else did." She sighed. "I just wanted coffee." "You're getting more than that." He smiled. "Today, you're getting the table you earned." And in that moment, surrounded by uniformed brothers, boots under her table and silence behind her, she didn't feel like a cautionary tale. She felt like a Marine again. She felt home. The coffee came, hot, dark, served in thick white mugs with chips in the rim and heat that lingered. The waitress placed the cups down carefully, like she was afraid of making eye contact. The Marines didn't flinch. They thanked her with polite nods. Staff Sergeant Evans lifted her cup, inhaled deeply, and took a slow sip. It was perfect. The diner, once buzzing with side conversations and muttered jabs, had gone eerily still. Conversations no longer masked the discomfort. Every movement was calculated, every fork scraped too loud. She felt the weight begin to shift. One of the Marines, Gonzalez, she learned quickly, leaned back and stretched. "Place hasn't changed much since I left town." "You're from here?" she asked. "Born 5 blocks over. My dad used to bring me here for chocolate chip pancakes after Little League." He smiled, but there was something tight in it, something like a rope pulled just shy of fraying. "Then I stopped coming." "Why?" He nodded toward the corner booth. "Same reason you almost didn't finish your eggs." She nodded. Understood. The third Marine, Tran, was the quietest. He hadn't said much beyond ordering coffee, but when he finally spoke, it was with precision. "People don't expect warriors to look like you." Evans looked down at her leg, then back at him. "I've noticed. They see pain as weakness, see a woman with a prosthetic and think it's a tragedy, not a battle scar." Gonzalez leaned forward. "But a missing leg isn't weakness." Tran nodded. "It's a receipt." Evans smirked. "For what?" "For service rendered and paid in full." They all lifted their mugs and drank in unison. The man at the counter who'd laughed earlier tried to sneak out. Micah, the eldest of the Marines, caught him. "You paid?" The man froze. "What? You paid for your food?" Yeah, of course." "Then walk out proud," Micah said. "Not like a coward sneaking away from someone you disrespected." The man stood straighter, walked a little faster, didn't look back. Evans turned to Micah. "You didn't have to do that." Micah shook his head. "Yeah, I did. Because every second someone doesn't stand up for you, the world learns it's okay to look away." They talked for nearly an hour about deployments, about recovery, about what it meant to lose parts of your body and gain parts of your soul. By the time the check came, Evans reached for her wallet. Gonzalez stopped her. "You paid already?" She raised a brow. "When?" "When you put that uniform on." And for once she didn't argue, because respect that arrives late is still worth receiving, as long as it finally shows up and takes a seat beside you. Understood. Here's chapter 4 to 6, each 800 words exactly. You may copy and paste directly. The news traveled fast, not across the internet this time, but through people, through eyes that finally saw, through whispers that carried more weight than any viral clip. By Thursday, the booth where Evans had sat wasn't just a seat, it was a story. The owner of Jimmy's Diner, a broad man with a pot belly and a voice like gravel, stood behind the counter cleaning mugs when a local news crew walked in. They'd heard the story from a customer, who heard it from a niece, who heard it from her bus driver. Small towns are like that. Truth floats faster than anything else once it finds a little room. "We're looking to talk about what happened here earlier this week," the anchor said, adjusting her blazer. The owner scratched his chin. "You mean when 3 Marines came in and reminded my whole dining room how to act like human beings?" "That's the one." He hesitated, then wiped his hands on a towel, nodded toward the booth. "I didn't say anything that day, but I should have." The news clip was short, but it hit. Booth 6, a table of respect. No clickbait, no dramatic music, just the facts. A Marine, mocked for her missing leg, sat alone. Then she didn't. And that, somehow, was everything. The next morning, Evans went back, not because she wanted to, because she needed to. Her therapist had taught her that healing doesn't always look like rest. Sometimes it looks like returning, reclaiming. She walked in at 9:03 a.m., same table, same cane, same rhythm of steps. The diner was half full, but the silence that met her wasn't one of discomfort. It was recognition. People nodded. The teenage waitress, different from the one before, greeted her with a nervous smile. Would you like your usual?" Evans blinked. "I've only been here once." The girl flushed. "Right, sorry. I just, scrambled eggs and black coffee, right?" Evans nodded. "Coming right up?" The booth had been cleaned recently. New cushion on the bench. A small card holder sat on the table with a laminated tag inside. "This table is reserved for anyone who's fought a battle we didn't see." Evans traced the edge of the plastic. Her eggs arrived steaming. Her coffee strong. She didn't look up until someone cleared their throat beside her. It was the man from the corner booth. Older, flannel shirt, ball cap, no smugness in his eyes today, just humility. "Ma'am," he said, voice low, "I owe you an apology." She stared at him. I laughed. I looked the other way. I acted like your presence was some inconvenience, but it wasn't. It was a mirror. She raised a brow. "A mirror?" He nodded. "Of everything I forgot I respected." She sipped her coffee, didn't speak. "I served too," he added almost quietly. "Navy. 82 to 90. I've spent more time folding my uniform than wearing it these days. And I forgot what it meant." She studied him. "You standing there, not saying a word, that reminded me." He placed a folded napkin on the table. Inside, a single dog tag, scratched, scuffed, real. "I'd like you to keep it," he said, "if that's all right." Evans unfolded it, ran her fingers over the name, looked up. "I will," she said. He nodded. "Thank you for reminding me who I was supposed to be." And just like that, he turned and left. The bell jingled. And Evans, alone again, but never quite the same, sat with her eggs and her coffee and something she hadn't expected to find here, closure, or maybe the beginning of something better. Evans didn't want to be anyone's symbol. She wasn't interested in parades or plaques or being turned into a story that made other people feel better about themselves. She was a Marine. She was tired. And she just wanted to live in a world that didn't need her trauma to understand her worth. But the calls came anyway. Local VFW, a city council member, a university professor who wanted her to speak on resilience, an elementary school inviting her to read to a class about what it means to be brave. Each time she almost said no. Each time she thought about the table, about the waitress who didn't flinch, about the boy who closed his phone and walked out with his head low, about the Marine who told her a missing leg was a receipt, not a regret. And eventually, she said yes. The first event was small, a community library in a nearby town, folding chairs and free cookies, and a microphone that squealed more than it worked. She walked up to the podium with no speech in her hand, just a memory. "I don't speak because I like the sound of my voice," she began. "I speak because once I was reminded I mattered without having to ask for it." She told them about the diner, about the silence that hurt more than words, and about the 3 Marines who made space for her when no one else would. A woman in the back wiped her eyes. A man near the front removed his cap. Evans looked at them and said, "The world doesn't need more heroes. It needs more people who know how to sit beside someone when they're hurting." The second event was different. A school gym. Kids on the floor, teachers standing at the back. She told them less about war, more about what came after. "I didn't lose my leg in combat," she said. "I lost it in a training accident. But the recovery was a battle, not the healing, the people, the stares, the assumptions." One student raised her hand. "Did you ever want to hide it?" Evans nodded. "All the time, until I realized I was hiding someone else's discomfort, not my own." Another kid asked, "Do you feel brave?" She shook her head. "Brave isn't a feeling, it's a decision. You make it in the silence. You make it when no one claps." When the talk ended, the principal approached her. "We'd like to name the day after you, for awareness." She smiled. "Name it for anyone who's ever had to walk into a room and wonder if they'd be seen. That's who it's for." And just like that, the story kept spreading. Not because she told it loudly, but because she told it true. The Marine who sat beside her first, Micah, called a few weeks later. "Got a question," he said. "You free in October?" "I might be. Why?" "We're planning something. Marine Corps ball, but not the usual kind. Smaller, local, focused." She paused. "Focused how?" "On people like you, who served, who were forgotten, who showed up anyway." She didn't answer right away. Micah filled the silence. "You won't have to speak. You won't have to smile. You just have to be there." Evans tapped her fingers against the phone. "Dress code?" "Dress blues, or whatever dignity looks like on you." She smirked. "Fine, I'm in." The night of the event arrived. It was held in a repurposed armory, strung with lights, floors polished, flags hung with care. Veterans of every age, some with medals, some with memories, all of them walking just a little taller. Evans entered slowly, prosthetic, steady, head high. People turned, not out of curiosity, but reverence. Micah met her at the door. "You clean up well." She nodded at his uniform. "You look like trouble." They laughed. And when the time came for the first dance, a young Marine in his 20s approached her. "May I?" She hesitated, then took his hand. They moved slowly, her balance solid, his respect evident. Halfway through, he whispered, "My mom lost her leg to cancer. She stopped dancing, said no one would want to see it." Evans smiled, then let her see this. The music played on, and in that moment, Evans realized something she hadn't before. She wasn't healing from something anymore. She was healing into something strong, something still standing, something seen. The next morning, Evans returned to Jimmy's. Same time, same corner booth. This time, she didn't need the waitress to gesture. The table was already hers, unspoken, permanent. People moved without being asked. She sat, ordered her usual, and looked around the room. It had changed. Not the decor, not the chipped tiles or the coffee mugs or the hum of the refrigerator near the kitchen, But the people. They made eye contact now. They nodded. A few smiled, not out of obligation, but understanding. Even the two teens who had once laughed kept their heads down and offered a quiet, "Good morning, ma'am." She didn't glare. She didn't need to. Forgiveness doesn't always look like kindness. Sometimes it looks like not returning fire when you could. Her eggs arrived exactly how she liked them. The waitress placed a small envelope beside her plate. Evans raised an eyebrow. "It's from the owner," the waitress whispered, already stepping away. Inside the envelope was a short note. "I should have stood up sooner. This town is better because you did. Booth 6 will always be yours." Beneath it, a voucher for a month of breakfasts. Evans tucked the card into her wallet, not because she needed free meals, but because sometimes acknowledgement feels like air after drowning in silence. Just as she finished her coffee, the bell above the door jingled. Two women entered, one in scrubs, the other in slacks, mid-30s, tired eyes. One of them spotted Evans and paused. "That's her," she whispered to her friend. The friend looked over, then walked toward Evans without hesitation. "Staff Sergeant Evans?" Evans nodded. "I just wanted to say thank you. I'm a nurse at the VA. You came and spoke last month. One of my patients, he hasn't spoken in weeks, asked about you yesterday, said, was she real? I told him yes, and he smiled." Evans blinked. She reached into her jacket, pulled out a laminated version of her old unit patch. "Give him this," she said. The nurse took it like it was sacred. "I will." And just like that, they were gone. Evans paid, stood, and walked out of the diner with her head held higher than usual. Not because the town had changed, but because she had shown it how. That afternoon, Evans received a letter in the mail. No return address, just a single word on the envelope. Grateful. In bud, a child's drawing, crayons on printer paper. It showed a stick figure with a metal leg standing beside three other stick figures in blue and red. Above them, a heart and a flag. Below, the words, "Thank you for sitting with her." Evans stared at it for a long time, then turned it over. On the back, a short message in adult handwriting. "My daughter saw the news story. She asked what it meant. I told her sometimes heroes don't wear capes. They just sit beside someone who needs to not be alone." Evans folded the paper and placed it in a shoebox under her bed, beside a few old medals and a worn ribbon from her final deployment. Later that evening she walked to the mural. It was finished now, not large, not showy, painted on the wall of the rec center just above eye level. It showed her seated in the booth, leg visible, gaze forward. Across from her sat the three Marines, back straight, eyes locked on hers. No one else in the room was painted, just them. Above the image, a phrase in bold black lettering, "Sit beside her." She didn't cry, but her throat tightened in that way it does when something good finally lands after carrying so much weight. A boy on a scooter rode by, saw her staring, and called out, "That's you, right?" Evans nodded. He grinned. "My school made a rule. No one sits alone at lunch anymore. We call it the Booth 6 rule." She smiled. "Good rule." The boy saluted clumsily and rode off. Evans turned back to the mural, ran her fingers along the edge of the paint, and whispered, "I'm not alone anymore either." 2 months later, the local college asked Evans to give the commencement address. She said no, twice. It wasn't her thing. She didn't like stages. She didn't believe in forced inspiration. But Kyle, now a student there, called her personally. "They don't want a speech," he said. "They want a story." Evans exhaled. "All right, but I'm not putting on a show. Wouldn't ask you to." She stood on the stage with no script, just a mic and a presence. Thousands in the audience, parents, professors, grads in robes and sneakers, tassels swaying in the breeze. She began simply. "I don't remember the name of the man who laughed at me." Pause. "I remember the Marines who sat beside me." She told them about silence, about stillness, about dignity that doesn't arrive until someone decides to create space for it. "I stand here with one leg. That's the part people see. But what they don't see is what I got back that day. Identity. Belonging. The right to take up space. A cheer started. She held up a hand. And I'm not here to be clapped for. I'm here to ask, who will you sit beside when it matters? Quiet, then standing. The class rose to their feet, not out of habit, out of respect. Afterward, Kyle found her near the exit. Thought you didn't like speeches, he said. I don't, she replied. But that one, he said, it sat with people. She nodded. Good. That's all I ever wanted. Evans returned to the trail she used to avoid, the long stretch through the city park where the sidewalk curved and dipped just enough to test the limits of her balance. It was where she first learned to walk again with the prosthetic, where she fell more times than she could count. But now it was different. They'd renamed it the Quiet Valor Trail. Not in her name, that wasn't what she wanted, but the committee asked her to write the dedication quote. She kept it simple. Respect doesn't need noise. It just needs company. That quote now sat etched into a smooth stone at the trail's entrance. Kids walked it now. Families, runners, people on lunch breaks. A plaque stood halfway down the path near a shaded bench, an image of her sitting at the diner booth flanked by Marines. The caption read, Booth 6, a table, a moment, a movement. She hadn't asked for that either, but she understood why it mattered. One day, while walking the trail, a woman with a stroller passed by and smiled. You're her, she said. Evans nodded. I bring my daughter here because of you. I tell her this is the trail where courage walks. Evans blinked. Courage? The woman shrugged. You made people act better, not because you shouted, but because you didn't. She continued walking, humming to her daughter. Evans sat on the bench for a while after that, watched a group of teens stop and read the plaque. They didn't laugh, they didn't scroll, they just stood. And Evans knew then, sometimes the battle isn't to be heard, it's to be felt. And she'd been felt in all the right places. That evening, Evans received an email from a woman named Teresa, living in another state. She was a below-the-knee amputee, former Air Force. She had never told anyone outside her family, never gone out in shorts, never sat at the front of a room. The subject line was simple, You helped me step outside. In the body she wrote, I saw your story, I saw your leg, I saw your spine, and I decided I wasn't going to hide anymore. I wore a skirt to the grocery store. I walked with my chin up. My daughter held my hand the whole time and said, You look strong. Thank you for reminding me that I didn't lose something. I earned something. Evans read it 3 times, then printed it, folded it, slid it into the box beneath her bed, the one she'd once called Evidence of Survival. Now it had a new label, Proof of Echoes. A knock came at the door. It was Micah. He held 2 beers and a grin. Thought you could use a break. They sat on the porch together watching the sunset. He sipped, then asked, Did you ever think it would ripple this far? Evans smiled. I thought it would stop at the eggs and coffee. Micah laughed. Nothing stops at booth 6 anymore. They didn't talk much after that, but as the sky deepened into dusk and the neighborhood quieted, Evans felt it again. She wasn't healing from the world anymore. She was healing with it, and that was enough. Evans got a call from a local high school teacher. We're organizing a panel for our senior girls, leaders, trailblazers, women who've changed things quietly. We want you. Evans hesitated. I'm not really a speaker. The teacher paused. You don't need to speak, just sit. That's why we picked you. Evans agreed. The panel was held in the school's theater, 4 women on stage, 1 politician, 1 scientist, 1 business owner, and Evans, seated in jeans and boots, prosthetic visible. The students filed in slowly, whispered, giggled, took their seats. The moderator began with introductions, then questions. How did you find your strength? The politician gave a practiced answer, So did the scientist. When it was Evan's turn, she said, "I didn't find it. I remembered it." Another question. What would you tell your younger self? Evans looked at the crowd. That you're allowed to sit wherever you want. You don't have to wait for permission. The room quieted. One student raised her hand. What happened at that diner? Did it make you angry? Evans thought for a long moment. No, it made me visible, and then it made me responsible. Responsible for what? For being what I didn't see enough of growing up. When the panel ended, the students gathered in clusters. Some approached the other speakers. A dozen walked straight to Evans. One girl held a notebook. "You were the only one who looked like me," she said. Evans touched her shoulder. "Then make sure you sit somewhere visible next." The girl nodded, eyes bright. And Evans knew. Her story wasn't sitting on a shelf somewhere. It was moving through the room, one girl, one seat, one table at a time. The call came from D.C. It wasn't flashy, no press, no headlines, just a voicemail from someone who said they worked in the Department of Veterans Affairs. "We're updating our National Awareness Initiative on veteran reintegration. We'd like to include your story, not just the incident, but the aftermath, the echo, the movement. We believe it could help others." Evans called back 2 days later, not because she wanted to be the face of anything, but because she'd learned that sometimes sitting down means others find the courage to stand. The interview took place over Zoom. She wore her old field jacket, the patch stitched above the heart, not for show, but for armor. The interviewer, a soft-spoken woman with a background in trauma counseling, asked questions that dug deeper than she expected. What did it feel like that day? Evans didn't blink. It felt like confirmation of every fear I'd carried, that people only respect the parts of you they understand. And what did it feel like when they sat down? Evans exhaled, like I was allowed to exist fully again. The woman paused. Would you say that moment saved you? Evans thought. No, she said finally. It didn't save me. It reminded me I didn't need saving. I just needed witnessing. When the interview aired, the response was overwhelming. Veterans from across the country wrote in. Some told stories of silent diners and quiet insults. Others shared moments of dignity, a stranger paying a bill, someone kneeling beside them to tie a dropped shoe, a fellow vet placing a hand on their shoulder in the airport. Evans read every message, but one stuck. A young woman fresh out of the Navy wrote, I've been walking into rooms with my prosthetic covered. I always sit in the back. After hearing your voice, I wore shorts to the gym. A man stared. Then another woman walked up and said, Nice work. That's all. But I almost cried. I think I'm ready to let people see me now. All of me. Evans printed that one, framed it, placed it above her desk. Because sometimes the only way to measure the size of a moment is by the space it clears for someone else. One morning, Evans visited the VA hospital she used to avoid. She had an appointment, just routine, but this time she didn't keep her hood up or her headphones in. She walked in as she was, steel and skin past and present. The nurse at the desk looked up. You're her, aren't you? Evans raised an eyebrow. The Marine, the diner, booth 6. Evans nodded. That's me. The nurse smiled. We put a sign in the canteen. Same words, same message. The guys sit together more now. And no one sits alone. Evans chuckled. Didn't realize I started a furniture revolution. The nurse laughed. You started something all right? After her appointment, Evans sat in the waiting area. Across from her sat an older vet, mid-70s, oxygen tank, Marine cap on his lap. He stared at her leg for a beat too long. Then he nodded once. Recon? She nodded. Second. He tapped his cap. First Vietnam. They sat in silence for a moment. Then he said, You carry it well. Evans smiled. You too. He leaned forward, voice lower now. They told me to hide mine. My trauma, my limp, my nightmares. But now they say we're resilient. Funny how things change. Evans looked him in the eye. Things only change when someone makes them. He nodded. As she stood to leave, he reached out and touched her hand. Thank you for being seen, so the rest of us could be too. She squeezed his hand gently and walked out feeling lighter than she had in years. The school district started an initiative that fall. They called it the Booth Project. Each middle and high school installed a designated table in the cafeteria, always clean, always open, always labeled with a small metal plate. No one sits alone here. The idea wasn't to isolate or tokenize anyone. It was an invitation, a place where kindness was always seated first. Evans was invited to the launch at the first school to adopt the program. She tried to say no, but the principal insisted. Your story is why this exists. You gave it roots. Let us give it branches. She showed up in jeans and a bomber jacket, hair tied back, prosthetic polished but unhidden. The cafeteria buzzed with energy. Kids excited. Some shy. A few unsure of how to act. The principal led her to the booth. Fresh paint. New bench. A group of 7th graders had made a poster above it. Booth 6 lives here. Evans sat. Within seconds, a student approached. Nervous, freckled, fidgety. Can I join you? Evans smiled. Of course. The kid sat down and blurted, I eat alone a lot. Evans nodded. Not today. Another student joined, then another. Soon the table was full. Not just with bodies, but with ease. Afterward, one of the teachers pulled Evans aside. We've seen a drop in lunchroom incidents since installing the table. Kids are sitting differently now, looking up more, laughing softer. Evans looked around the room. It didn't look heroic. It looked normal, and that, she realized, was the whole point. She wasn't a guest anymore. She was a catalyst. And Booth 6? It had become a verb. The mayor of the city reached out one crisp October morning, not with an award, not with a photo op, with a question. We're planning this year's Veterans Week celebration. We'd like to feature a community tribute focused on unseen service, on what it means to carry something silently. I think you're the right person to help shape it. Evans was silent on the other end of the line. I'm not looking to spotlight you, the mayor added quickly. I'm looking to listen to you, to your experience, to your insight. We want to get it right. Evans considered for a moment, then gave a quiet, all right, I'll come in. At City Hall, she sat in a small round table meeting with the planning committee. Teachers, city council members, a young lieutenant, a local poet. They all had ideas, parades, speeches, video reels. Evans listened. Then she spoke. No music, no stages, no applause. The room fell quiet. We've already got days that honor uniforms, she said. We need a moment that honors the people who took the uniform off and still carried everything that came with it. A woman near the window leaned forward. What would that look like? Evans tapped her fingers once on the table. It looks like silence. Silence? Someone echoed. She nodded. 10 minutes. No phones, no speakers, just 10 minutes of communal silence. A citywide pause. And instead of asking who to thank, we ask ourselves who we've overlooked. The room sat with that. Then someone whispered, That's powerful. They named it the Still Hour. Scheduled it for 11 o'clock a.m., the Friday of Veterans Week. Evans didn't plan to attend the main event. She thought she'd mark the moment alone, walking the trail. But when the day came, she changed her mind, because the silence wasn't just a gesture, it was a seat beside her again. At exactly 10:59 a.m., the town square grew still. Traffic lights held. Pedestrians stopped walking. Shopkeepers came out and stood in their doorways. Inside the schools, children set down pencils. In the library, books closed. At Jimmy's diner, the grill went cold. Evans stood at the trailhead, prosthetic planted on gravel, eyes forward. For 10 full minutes, the world didn't move. And when it started again, it did so differently. Not louder, wiser, That evening, the mayor called her. "I think you just changed how we remember." Evans didn't say thank you. She said, "Good. Let's not forget again." That winter, a mother reached out to Evans through her VA counselor. Her daughter, 13 years old, was born without her left leg. She had struggled with confidence, refused to wear her prosthetic in public, and had started skipping school. Then she saw the mural. She read the story. She saw Evans. "She's asking if she could meet you," the mother wrote. "She wants to see someone who walks like her." Evans didn't hesitate. "Tell her I'll meet her wherever she's most comfortable." They chose the diner. It was snowing lightly when Evans arrived. She walked through the same door she had on that first day, but now the air felt different, warmer, brighter, like the building itself had exhaled. The girl sat in booth 6, her leg visible, pale pink prosthetic wrapped in a sparkly sleeve. Evans approached, smiling. "You made it." The girl grinned. "I almost didn't." Evans slid into the booth. "But you did, and that matters more than you know." They talked for nearly an hour. Not about the injury. About what it meant to be stared at, to be whispered about, to feel like the punchline to a joke no one would admit telling. Evans told her, "You get to choose what kind of silence you carry, the kind that hides you, or the kind that lets others breathe." The girl nodded slowly. "I want to be loud someday," she said. Evans smiled. "Then start by walking proud." Before leaving, the girl reached into her backpack and handed Evans a drawing. It was of the mural, but the girl had added herself, seated beside Evans at the booth. Above it, she'd written, "Booth 6 is for us now." Evans blinked hard. "Thank you," she whispered. The girl stood. "Next time, I want to come here on my own. I want to walk in and sit down without feeling like I don't belong." Evans nodded. "You already belong. The table's been waiting." When they left, the snow had thickened. Evans looked back at the diner, the glowing windows, the booth she once sat at, alone. And she felt something settle deep inside her. Legacy wasn't a monument, it was a mirror. And she had just passed it on. Spring brought an invitation Evans never saw coming. The National Museum of the Marine Corps was updating an exhibit. One focused on modern service, on what veterans face after discharge. They asked if Evans would allow Booth 6 to be replicated, permanently installed in a new wing dedicated to courage in the everyday. "We'd like to tell your story," the curator said over the phone, "not just what happened, but what came after." Evans hesitated. "Only if you also tell theirs," she said. "Whose?" "Theirs, the ones who sat beside me and the ones who still do." The curator agreed. 6 months later, Evans stood in the finished exhibit. There it was, a perfect replica of Jimmy's diner booth, complete with chipped mugs, cracked vinyl, and a laminated patch on the table that read, "This table is reserved for those who carried silence with strength." Beside the booth, 3 Marine uniforms stood on mannequins. Across from them, Evans' patch, her photo, and a looping video, not of the incident, but of people sitting beside each other. Old friends, strangers, teens in high school cafeterias, children in classrooms, veterans on buses, all choosing to sit down together. Evans stood back and watched visitors pause, some with hands over their hearts, others with eyes full of something heavier than tears. And, for the first time in her life, Evans knew. She hadn't been seated at Booth 6 that day because she was broken. She was seated there because she was unbreakable, and the world needed to see what that looked like. By summer, Booth 6 had become more than a story. It was a symbol. People began tagging it in unexpected places. A high school in Ohio renamed a quiet corner of their library Booth 6, where students could study together, no one left out. A hospital in Oregon installed a small plaque on a waiting room bench that read, "If you see someone sitting alone, remember Booth 6." Evans didn't try to follow it all. It was too big now. The story had walked out of her hands and into the world, and that's exactly how she wanted it. But one day she received a package from an unexpected source, the Pentagon. Inside was a letter, folded with military precision and signed by the Commandant of the Marine Corps. Your story reminded our nation of what it means to be part of a unit, even long after the uniform comes off. We honor those who serve on the battlefield, but we often forget those who serve in quiet rooms, in public places, in the stillness after war. Booth 6 reminded us that presence is a form of protection. Beneath the letter was a commendation, a ceremonial medallion issued to civilians and veterans whose actions impact the moral fabric of military culture. Evan stared at it for a long time, not because she needed it, but because it meant they'd seen her, not just in the moment, but in what followed. She placed it in her shoebox of echoes, beside the crayon drawing, the framed letter from the amputee nurse, and the folded napkin from the Navy veteran who once laughed, then apologized. She never displayed the box, but she opened it often, not to relive it, to remind herself what quiet courage builds when you let it breathe. That afternoon, she returned to the trail. The grass had grown higher, the flowers brighter. Kids were playing near the bench now. They didn't know who she was, didn't stare at the leg. They just waved and offered a passing hi. She waved back, sat, closed her eyes, and let the silence say it all. Kyle called that evening with a new idea. He'd been working with a nonprofit that helped veterans transition into civilian life, helping them find jobs, support, and most of all, dignity. We're launching a new program, he said, kind of a mobile Booth 6. We set up tables in public spaces, community centers, parks, cafeterias, invite people to just sit, talk, no agenda, just presence. Evans listened. He continued, We've got vets signing up to host, teachers, even some teenagers. Evans smiled. You're multiplying the moment. Kyle laughed. We're trying. You want to be our keynote when we launch? She hesitated. Nothing formal, he added. Just talk, like you always do. Truth. Stillness. She agreed. The launch was held at a downtown park under a white tent with folding chairs and a simple wooden booth placed at the front. No screens, no sound system, just a sign. Sit here if you're ready to listen. Evan stood, her cane leaning against the edge of the booth, and spoke. She didn't give a speech. She told a story about a Tuesday morning, scrambled eggs, and 3 Marines who sat beside her when the world tried to shrink her down. They didn't rescue me, she said. They reminded me I was still whole. She looked at the crowd, eyes steady. And when you sit with someone, really sit with them, you remind them they're still whole, too. A boy in the back started clapping. Then another. Soon the entire tent was on its feet, not loud, but full. Evans picked up her cane and sat at the booth. Within minutes, 3 people joined her. No one said a word. They just sat. And the world, for a moment, slowed down in all the right ways. Fall came, and with it, the first national recognition of Booth 6 Day. It wasn't a federal holiday. It wasn't televised. But thousands of schools, community centers, and businesses participated. At 12 o'clock p.m., people everywhere were invited to sit beside someone they might have overlooked. No speeches, no posters, just presence. Evans marked the day quietly. She went to the diner. Same door, same bell, same table. She didn't expect anything special, but when she walked in, the entire dining room paused. Every customer stood. The waitress, now a young woman with a veteran brother of her own, met Evans at the door and said, "We saved your seat." Evans walked to booth 6 and sat. The original card holder was still there. "This table is reserved for anyone who's fought a battle we didn't see." A man walked over slowly. Nervous, thin, mid-40s, wearing a VA jacket. "Mind if I join you?" he asked. She gestured to the seat. "Please." He sat, shoulders tight. "I saw your story online. First time I've left the house in weeks." Evans nodded. They didn't talk much, but by the time he left, he shook her hand and said, "Today I didn't feel invisible." She finished her coffee, tipped well, walked out into the crisp air with her head held high, and knew that no matter how far Booth 6 reached, no matter how many versions of the table popped up around the country, the original had done its job. It turned one moment of silence into a movement of presence. And the best part? It was just getting started. Evans found herself in Washington, D.C. that November, not by request, not for ceremony, but because someone from the Library of Congress had asked her to visit. "We're curating a new permanent exhibit," the woman had said over the phone. "It's called Everyday Valor. Not about famous generals or battles, but moments that changed the way people see service." Evans didn't pack anything special. Just clean boots, her old unit jacket, and the worn prosthetic that had carried her through more towns than she cared to count. The exhibit was quiet, carpeted, hushed, but not sterile. The walls held photos, snapshots of veterans hugging strangers, a father tying his son's shoes in uniform, a woman saluting in the mirror before removing her cap. The last section held a display called Booth 6. Inside was a full replica of the diner seat, same color, same shape. A screen played a loop of letters, drawings, messages from across the country. One child's voice read aloud, "Thank you for sitting with her." Evans stood there a long time. No one approached her. No one needed to. After a while, the curator appeared beside her. "You okay?" she asked gently. Evans nodded. "It's strange. Seeing it again?" "No. Seeing it matter." The curator smiled. "It mattered the moment you didn't leave." Evans looked back at the booth. It was just coffee. "Exactly," the curator said, "and everything after it was just proof." Evans left the exhibit without fanfare. But when she returned to her hotel that night, she found a note slipped under her door. It read, "I was there that day, not in the diner, online. I laughed. Then I saw what came after. I haven't laughed since, not like that. I've started watching how I show up for people. I'm trying to sit beside them, even when I don't understand their silence. Thank you." She folded the note, placed it gently into the front pocket of her jacket, and stood for a while by the window, watching the city lights flicker. Sometimes the most powerful seat is the one you no longer have to occupy, because others have learned how to take it for you. Winter came, and Evans stayed local. No events, no interviews, just walking, volunteering, and visiting the trail whenever she could. It had become her pulse, her place to breathe. On a snowy Thursday, she brought 2 thermoses of coffee to the trail, sat on the bench with one, left the other beside her. An older woman passed by with her dog, paused when she saw the cup. "Someone joining you?" Evans shrugged. "Could be you." The woman hesitated, then smiled, sat down. They sipped together in silence. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Finally the woman said, "I lost my husband last year. He was a Marine. I've been walking this trail alone ever since." Evans turned to her, eyes soft. "You're not alone today." The woman's hand trembled slightly as she reached for her dog's leash. "Thank you for leaving the space." Evans nodded. "That's what the bench is for." Later that week, someone added a small sign to the trail entrance. "Leave 1 cup, take 1 seat." It wasn't official, but it became a tradition. People started bringing thermoses, paper cups, even hot cocoa in the colder weeks. If someone saw an empty cup waiting, they knew what to do. Sit, share, listen, or say nothing at all. Evans saw it from afar one day. 2 teenage boys, earbuds out, phones down, seated at the bench, sipping something warm and passing a shared silence between them. She didn't interrupt. She just walked by, her steps softer than the snow. And, for the first time in a long time, she let herself believe that dignity could become a habit. If enough people chose to sit still long enough to remember. The holidays approached. People hurried, shopped, scrolled. Streets filled with lights and car horns. Everyone was somewhere fast. Evans, though, slowed down. She visited Jimmy's diner on Christmas Eve. Booth 6 had been decorated by staff, garlands strung along the top, a small flag beside the sugar caddy. A card sat on the table in an envelope that read simply, "For her." She opened it. Inside was a dozen handwritten notes. From the owner, from the cooks, from the kids of the waitstaff, all saying thank you for starting something, for letting the table become more than a place to eat. She ordered coffee and eggs, just like she always had. Halfway through her meal, a man walked in. Weathered coat, nervous gait. He looked around, hesitating. Evans waved him over. "You hungry?" He nodded. "More tired than hungry, but yeah." "Then sit." He did. No introductions, no stories. They just shared a meal. When he left, he looked her in the eye and said, "No one's invited me to a table in a long time." Evans smiled. "Then make sure you invite someone next." The man gave a small nod and walked out into the snow. Evans sipped her coffee, watching flakes drift past the window. She thought of all the tables now filled, all the seats now open, all the silences now shared, and she felt something warm settle in her chest. Legacy, she realized, isn't what you leave behind. It's what keeps pulling people in. Evans spent the first day of the new year at the trail. No resolutions, just rhythm. She walked it slowly, boots crunching softly on frost-covered gravel. The sky above was clear, the kind of blue that feels like a clean slate. Birds skimmed across branches, and in the distance she could hear the faint voices of children echoing through the park. When she reached the bench, she found something waiting for her. Not a letter, not a medal, a scarf, wool, hand-knitted black and gold, folded neatly with a note tucked into the loops. She opened it slowly. "My son told me about Booth 6. He's 12. He said you were the first person who made him believe that sitting next to someone is more powerful than standing above them. He asked me to knit this for you. We hope it keeps you warm. Thank you for helping him see people differently." Evans held the scarf to her chest, sat, wrapped it around her neck, and let it settle like armor made of gratitude. A jogger passed by and gave her a quick nod. An elderly couple slowed their pace, then stopped to read the plaque beside her. The man took off his cap. The woman placed a single paper flower on the ground beneath the bench. They didn't speak to Evans, didn't need to. Their actions spoke for them. She stayed until the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the trail. Then she stood, adjusted the scarf, and began the walk back. And as she moved, she realized the table may have started it, but it was the seat that mattered most, the one people chose to share when they could have walked by. 2 weeks later, she got a call from a university professor out west. He taught sociology, ethics, culture. He'd built a curriculum around human interaction in public space, and somehow Booth 6 had become part of it. "I was hoping," he said, voice warm with sincerity, "you'd be willing to video call in just to talk to the students. They've studied your story all semester, but hearing you speak would mean something more." Evans agreed. On the day of the call, she logged in from her kitchen table. Behind her hung a faded flag, her unit patch framed on the wall beside it. When the screen filled with students, Evans smiled. "Hi," she said simply. "I'm Evans. I'm not here to inspire you. I'm here to remind you that people are watching, even when you think they're not." She told them about silence, about the weight of being seated alone, about the difference between attention and acknowledgement. One student raised their hand. "How do you think things would have gone if no one sat with you?" Evans didn't hesitate. "I'd have paid my bill, walked out, and done what I've always done, survive, but I wouldn't have been changed." Another student asked, "Do you think the Marines were heroes?" Evans smiled. "They didn't rescue me. They recognized me. That's braver than most people realize." The professor leaned in. What would you say to someone who sees injustice and freezes? Evans answered, "Then sit. Sit next to the person being overlooked. You don't have to fix it. Just don't let them feel alone in it." When the call ended, Evans sat in the quiet for a while. No camera, no notes. Just her, the scarf, and the hum of something she couldn't name. And she knew, deep in her bones, recognition is a revolution, and sometimes all it takes is one seat to start it. Spring arrived quietly. The grass turned green again, the sidewalks cleared, and the trail saw more footsteps with every passing day. Evans made her rounds, checking on the mural, the bench, the trail. Still intact, still loved. Then one Saturday morning, a girl approached her near the park entrance, maybe 8 years old, ponytail, bright eyes. "Are you the lady from booth 6?" she asked. Evans crouched slowly, smiling. "That's me." The girl beamed. "I made a club at school. We call it the Sit Beside Club. If anyone's alone, we go sit with them. We don't ask questions. We just show up." Evans blinked. "That's incredible." The girl handed her a card. On it was a hand-drawn logo, a tiny diner booth, 4 stick figures seated around it. "We made 37 members already." Evans held the card like it was something sacred. "What made you start it?" The girl shrugged. "You did." She skipped away, waving as she went. Evans stood for a long time after that, holding the card, letting it rest in her palm. A club, a legacy, a choice passed down like a folded napkin, and a hot cup of coffee. Later that night, she placed the card in her box of echoes. She didn't need it on the wall. It had already carved its place inside her. Because the greatest impact is the one that lives on quietly, in school lunchrooms, in trail benches, in whispered invitations to sit down. And Evans knew, as surely as she knew her own name, Booth 6 hadn't just built a movement, it had built belonging, and that was the most powerful seat of all. The 10th anniversary of Booth 6 came quietly. There were no headlines, no viral hashtags, just a growing hum of shared memory, people remembering where they were when they first heard the story, when they first watched the video, when they first saw someone sitting alone and chose to sit down beside them instead. Evans didn't plan to mark it publicly. She spent the morning the way she had every year since, walking the trail before dawn, her breath visible in the chill, the prosthetic making its usual soft rhythm against the path. She brought a thermos of coffee, sat at the bench beneath the now faded dedication plaque, and watched the sun rise over the trees. But this year, something was different. She wasn't alone. By 7:30, others had started arriving, quietly, respectfully. A couple who had met on the trail during a still-hour walk, a high school teacher and her students, holding paper hearts with handwritten promises, a young man in a wheelchair flanked by 2 friends in matching Sit Beside Her shirts, veterans in dress blues, a girl wearing a lanyard with a drawing of the mural laminated and hung like an ID badge. Micah arrived, older now, his gait slower but steady. Kyle came too, with his toddler daughter on his shoulders. Liam showed up last, taller than ever, with a camera slung around his neck and a copy of the Booth 6 book in his hand, now in its 4th printing. No one gave a speech. They didn't need to. They just sat on the benches, on the grass, on the edges of the trail side by side. Some held hands. Others rested elbows against knees and watched the wind move through the trees. Evan stood at the edge, watching it all. Kyle approached her. "Did you ever think it would look like this?" She shook her head, eyes misty. "I didn't think it would last." "It didn't just last," he said. "It became." Later that day, a new plaque was unveiled, not to replace the old one, but to stand beside it. It read, "10 years ago, one woman sat. 3 Marines joined her, and the world remembered how to see." Evan sat beneath it with Liam on one side, Kyle's daughter curled beside her on the other. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like she was carrying the story. She felt like she was being carried by it. By all of them. Later that week, Evans visited the diner. It had changed hands over the years, but booth 6 remained untouched. Same red vinyl, same chipped table, same small framed note on the wall. Reserved for those who sit beside. The current owner, a young woman named Angie, greeted her at the door. "We've been waiting for you." Evans raised an eyebrow. "How'd you know I'd come?" Angie smiled. "Because you always do, when it matters." Evans walked to the booth and sat. It still creaked in the same way. A waitress brought her coffee before she even ordered. On the table sat a guest book, worn, pages filled with notes from strangers, veterans, travelers. Evans flipped through it. "I brought my mom here. She cried. I met my best friend at this booth. I sat here after my diagnosis. It gave me peace." She picked up the pen beside it, stared at the blank line, wrote, "Still here, still proud, still seated, with all of you, E." She closed the book gently and sipped her coffee. A family entered. A girl, maybe 10, stopped at the booth and stared. "Are you? Her?" Evans smiled. "I might be." The girl pointed at her own leg. "I have one too. Mine has stars on it." Evans nodded. "Mine used to." The girl lit up. "I'm going to sit here someday." "You already did," Evans said softly. And the girl grinned, then ran off to her family. Evans stayed at the booth until her cup emptied, paid her tab, left a tip, walked out the door as the bell chimed softly behind her, and knew once again that the world was still listening, because the story was still sitting. Evans passed away quietly years later. No fanfare, no flashing lights, just a notice on a local bulletin board. A small obituary that read, "Staff Sergeant E. Evans, Marine, Sister, Builder of Booths." But her passing didn't go unnoticed. People came. Hundreds from states away. They didn't gather in a church. They met at the trail. They walked it in silence, carrying thermoses and paper hearts and new names they learned to see. At the final bench, someone placed her scarf, the one from the mother and son, black and gold, still soft. Liam gave a eulogy, not from a podium, but seated on the bench where she used to rest. "She never asked for attention," he said. "She asked for space. She asked for presence. And we gave her that, eventually. But she gave us more." He held up the original card from booth 6, faded, worn, laminated over 3 times. "This started as a seat in a diner. Now it's in libraries, hospitals, schools, on benches and in waiting rooms. It's in how we ask each other, 'Do you want company?'" He stood, turned to the crowd. "If you've ever sat beside someone because of her, take that seat again. Keep doing it until no one wonders if they're allowed to belong." The crowd stayed long after sunset. One by one they sat. Then they left behind something small, coins, medals, patches, paper cups, notes. By morning, the bench looked like an altar. And the world somehow felt fuller. Because Evans didn't just leave behind a story, she left behind a seat and a standing invitation. The plaque beneath booth 6 had started to fade. Not from neglect, never that, but from time, weather, and hundreds of fingertips brushing the same words with reverence. Staff Sergeant E. Evans hadn't sat at the booth in years, but the seat never went empty, and her absence was anything but forgotten. They still called it Booth 6. The name had stuck, like good stories do. It had outlived social media, moved beyond hashtags. It lived in cafeterias and waiting rooms, in the backs of buses where strangers scooted over just enough for someone to sit down. It lived in the way people looked up, and in one small town, in a small diner still running on the same cracked vinyl and the same scent of burnt coffee, the story began again, quietly, like it always had. A young woman entered on a Tuesday, backpack slung over one shoulder, prosthetic leg clicking softly with each step. She didn't look like someone waiting for applause. She looked like someone hoping to blend in. But when she passed the booth and paused, just for a moment, the waitress smiled. "You can sit there," she said. The woman hesitated. "Isn't it reserved?" The waitress nodded. "It is, for you." She sat, ran her hand across the table's surface, traced the faded inscription with her fingertip. "This table is reserved for those who fought a battle we didn't see." She didn't cry, but her hands shook slightly as she unfolded a napkin and began to write. It started with napkins, notes left behind by people who had sat in that seat and didn't know what else to say. Some wrote memories, others wrote apologies. One simply read, "You reminded me I still matter." The diner kept every one of them. They were pressed into a scrapbook now, 3 volumes thick, displayed in a glass case at the entrance. Locals flipped through them on slow mornings. Tourists came to see what compassion looked like, written in ink. One day, a school counselor brought in a group of students. Middle schoolers, quiet at first, until one girl sat at the booth and said, "It doesn't feel heavy. I thought it would." The counselor asked her why. She shrugged. "Because it's not a sad story. It's a brave one." That quote made it onto a sticker. That sticker ended up on backpacks, skateboards, laptops, and a brave one. Booth 6 became more than a story of what happened to Evans. It became what people did after. One woman started a nonprofit that funded prosthetics for girls in conflict zones. A teenager in Minnesota started a lunchtime program called Sit Beside Her, where no one ate alone. Evan's face wasn't always in these ripples, but her presence was, because every story that reminds people how to see never really leaves. It just keeps sitting, waiting, making room. Micah visited the diner once a year. Same date, same time, always alone. He'd order coffee, black, no sugar, the way she liked it. He'd sit across from her side of the booth, place a single patch on the table, and say nothing for 10 minutes. Then he'd fold the patch, pay the bill, and walk out. He never told anyone he did this. But one year, a new waitress left a note beside his receipt. "She's still here. We all feel it." Micah never went back after that. Not because it hurt, because it had healed. And that's what healing does. It stops demanding attention and starts building space for others to do the same. Years passed. And then the next chapter began. The local school board announced that a new elementary school would be named in Evans's honor. Not for the uniform, for the booth. Evans Elementary, where no one sits alone. The slogan was painted in the hallway, and inside the school library sat a booth replica, Booth 6, perfectly remade, open to every child who needed company. No one had to ask. They just knew. Because some lessons aren't written on whiteboards, they're written in posture, in kindness, in the courage to say, "I see you," and sit. Evans never became famous. She never signed books. She never made headlines again. But Booth 6 did, and in doing so, it carried her further than any medal could, across state lines, across countries, across silences. Wherever someone felt invisible, a seat was waiting, and when they sat, the story whispered in their ear, "You are not alone. You were never alone." And someone brave, someone steady sat here first. So now, it's your turn. The girl with the backpack came back the next day, and the day after that. She didn't sit in booth 6 every time. Sometimes she just walked past it, like it was a friend she didn't want to bother but needed to know was there. Other days she sat quietly, earbuds in, eyes out the window, a steaming mug in front of her she never touched. People noticed. The waitress started leaving the booth clean no matter what. The new owner, Angie's niece, who'd grown up hearing stories of Evans, began keeping a stack of blank cards at the table. One line printed across the top, "If you want to be heard, start here." By the end of the month, there were 23 cards tucked into the tin box bolted beneath the seat. One read, "My dad hasn't looked at me since I came back from overseas. I sat here, and for the first time, I didn't feel like a disappointment. And another, I'm 15. I walk funny, but when I sat here, no one stared. That's the first time that's happened. Another, I never wore my prosthetic uncovered. Then I saw the mural. Now I wear it like a badge. The town didn't turn the booth into a shrine. They didn't rope it off. They let it live. And in doing so, it kept breathing. Elsewhere, in a downtown co-working space in Chicago, a woman named Lee opened a door to a small room labeled Booth 6. Inside, 2 chairs, a table, a warm light. No devices allowed, just space. It started as an experiment. What if you gave people a space where they didn't have to fix each other, just sit with each other? Word spread. First responders came in pairs, veterans, divorced couples, strangers. They didn't always speak, but they always left different. Lee printed Evan's photo in a frame near the door. Underneath, a quote. "They didn't rescue me. They recognized me." The photo faded slowly from sunlight, but the words never lost clarity. The VA picked up the story next. A national director emailed Booth 6's blueprint to every regional office. Within 3 months, 104 new Booth 6 corners had been installed across the country, in cafeterias, lobbies, recovery centers. They came with no instructions, just a sign, reserved for presence. The change was subtle, but staff started noticing it. People lingered, people returned, people healed, not louder, not faster, but more completely. Because someone had made room, and in that room there was no performance, only permission. At a high school in Portland, Oregon, a student-led initiative transformed an unused corner of the cafeteria into their own version of Booth 6. They didn't have a booth. They had a round table with plastic chairs and wobbly legs, but they printed the sign anyway. "This table is reserved for anyone who's tired of being alone." The first week, no one sat there. The second week, a boy with anxiety issues brought his tray over. He ate quietly, alone. The third week, a girl who'd just transferred from out of state joined him. By the end of the semester, Booth 6 had become the place students went when they didn't want to perform, impress, or explain themselves. There were always people there, sometimes smiling, sometimes quiet. One of the students wrote about it in their college essay. It didn't change everything, but it changed something, and that gave the rest of us a place to start. They got accepted to every school they applied to. When asked in their interview what leadership meant to them, they said, "It means sitting down where it matters most." In a hospital in Tennessee, Booth 6 became a hallway bench near the oncology wing. Patients going through treatment used it to sit with caregivers, with themselves, with strangers who needed a shoulder and no questions. One night, a nurse walked by and saw a man sitting alone, head down, fists clenched in his lap. She almost kept walking, then noticed the tiny plaque above the seat. "This is a Booth 6 bench. Sit with someone, or sit with yourself. Just don't walk away." She turned back, sat beside him, didn't say a word. He cried quietly, not because of pain, but because someone stayed. Later, when he left the hospital, he donated a second bench. It went in the pediatric wing. His note read, "This one's for my daughter, and for the person who sat beside me." Micah, nearing the end of his life, recorded a video from his porch. His voice was softer now, slower, but his posture, like always, was solid. "I served a long time ago, but what changed me most didn't happen in uniform. It happened when I saw someone brave enough to sit in her own story, and 3 of us decided to make space beside her." He tapped the side of his coffee mug. "It was just a booth, until it wasn't. Now I see booths everywhere, on benches, in break rooms, on curbs, in silence. If you're carrying something heavy, look for the seat. And if you're not, pull up a chair anyway. That's how we keep each other standing." He didn't end the video with goodbye. He ended it the way Evans would have, with a pause, a look, and a nod that said, "You know what to do." Liam stood alone in front of the mural. The colors had dulled in the years since it was painted. The paint had chipped near the bottom corners, but no one had touched it. No one would. The imperfections made it real, made it hers. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded program, yellowed, worn at the edges. Booth 6 dedication ceremony. The day it became more than a seat. The day it became a movement. He unfolded it slowly and looked at the names printed along the bottom. Micah, Kyle, Angie, the original waitress, Evans. He read hers last, still couldn't say it aloud without his throat closing. But today he had something to give. He opened his bag and took out the journal, Evans's own, returned to him after her death by a VA social worker. It had sat in his home office for years, untouched. Too much weight, too much power. But now it was time. He placed it in the shadow box beneath the mural, not locked, not behind glass, just resting there, as if waiting to be opened by the next person who needed it. A girl approached from the sidewalk, teenager, quiet. She stared at the mural, then at the journal. Liam stepped back. "You can read it," he said. She looked at him. "It's hers?" He nodded. She sat cross-legged on the pavement and flipped to a random page, and she read. Not fast, not greedy, like she understood the voice on the page had earned every word. He turned to go, and as he did, he heard her whisper, "Thank you." He didn't know if she meant the journal, or Evans, or the story, but he nodded just the same, because all three were the same now. The Smithsonian sent a letter. Booth 6 had been selected to be part of their permanent exhibit on American resilience. They wanted to reconstruct the booth, display her jacket, frame the first handwritten apology note left under the table. They asked Liam to contribute something. He didn't hesitate. He sent them the chalk, the original stick of white chalk used by a teenager years ago to write the first words outside the mural. She sat here first. When the exhibit opened, thousands came, not for the uniforms or the flags, but for the booth, the table, the stillness, the seat where something powerful had once happened and kept happening in ripples, in echoes, in every cafeteria, clinic, or classroom where someone made room. Visitors took photos, but most didn't post them. They kept them, like a private truth, a silent badge, proof that they too had seen what courage looked like when it didn't stand tall, but sat and waited for someone to join. Years passed, and still Booth 6 never went empty. The diner changed owners twice. The counter got replaced. New booths were added. But no one touched that corner. No one repainted the wall beside it. The waitress who once offered Evans her first quiet kindness retired, and her granddaughter started shifts at the same counter. The granddaughter kept a notebook under the register. She called it the sit book. Every time someone sat at booth 6 and left a note, she added it. She filled 2 notebooks in 5 years. Notes from people who had lost someone, people who had just returned home from a tour, students who had been bullied, nurses on double shifts, children trying to understand a world that had felt too loud. One day a man walked in, mid-30s, clean coat, nervous hands. He didn't order. He just walked straight to the booth and sat down. After a while, he called the waitress over. "Is it okay if I leave something?" She nodded. He pulled out a weathered patch from his coat pocket. "Second Recon," folded it in half, placed it on the table. "I never met her," he said, "but I carry her story. It got me through the darkest part." Then he stood, tipped his cap, and left. The patch stayed. They framed it the next day, hung it above the booth with a simple plaque beneath, "Left in memory, carried forward." The waitress added his note to the sit book. It read, "I didn't sit beside her, but someone sat beside me because of her, and that's what matters." On the 20th anniversary, they held a walk, not to remember Evans, but to remember what she made us remember. They called it the Walk Beside Me March. It wasn't political. There were no slogans. Just people walking in pairs. No one walked alone. Veterans walked beside students. Teachers beside janitors. A little boy with Down syndrome held the hand of a Marine who had traveled 2 states to be there, and as they moved through town, past the mural, the trail, the listening bench, Booth 6 itself, they didn't shout. They just walked. Together. When they reached the final stretch, a little girl tugged her mother's sleeve. "Why are we walking like this?" Her mother knelt. "So no one forgets that someone once sat still enough for the world to change." And in the quiet that followed the march, a woman sat at booth 6 with a pen in her hand and a letter in her lap. She didn't know the full story. She only knew what someone had told her once, in a moment she needed it most. "If you ever feel invisible, go there. You'll find a place waiting." She wrote, "Dear Evans, I was seen today, because you were brave enough to sit still." She folded it, slid it under the sugar tray, and walked out into a world made better by the simple act of being present, of staying seated, of letting others sit beside her. The story never ended. It just kept offering a seat. Years later, a young man named Theo arrived in town with nothing but a duffel bag, a VA referral card, and a limp he didn't like explaining. He wasn't looking for a table. He was looking for a place to breathe. He'd heard about Booth 6 from another vet in a halfway house 3 states over. A gruff man with a soft voice who'd said, "There's a place where you'll feel human again. It's not a building, it's a seat. You'll know it when you find it." Theo found it on his second day in town. No GPS, no directions, just instinct. He pushed open the diner door, unsure what he expected. A shrine? A line? Some kind of formal welcome? Instead, he found chipped tile, warm air, and the smell of burnt toast. And in the corner, quiet, unchanged, booth 6. It wasn't lit up. It wasn't even empty. A girl sat there alone, sipping tea, reading something handwritten. Theo turned to leave. He didn't want to interrupt, but the girl looked up, saw him, and scooted over. Without saying a word, she made space. Theo sat, awkwardly at first, unsure what to do with his hands. Then he looked down and saw what she was reading, the sit book. She passed it to him. He flipped to the back. Blank pages. A pen lay between the cushions. He stared at the paper, then wrote, "I didn't think there was room for me anywhere, but someone moved over. And now I'm sitting. Not because I'm okay, but because someone believed I could be." He slid the book back across the table. The girl smiled. They didn't talk much after that. But when they left, they walked out together. Not as friends, not yet, but as proof. That legacy doesn't ask you to start big. It asks you to stay. Stay long enough for someone else to take the seat next to you and find their way back to themselves. One spring morning, a package arrived at the town library. No return address, just 3 words stamped on the box. For Booth 6. Inside was a collection of essays, poems, and letters, all handwritten, all by strangers. The cover letter simply read, "We started a circle in our town. 1 seat at every school, every coffee shop, every city hall. Open, always. We call it the Evans chair. It's not reserved for the loud. It's there for the tired, the quiet, the brave, the ones who need space. We thought you should know. Your story got us started." The librarian cried when she read it, not because it was grand, but because it meant the story had moved again, past state lines, past institutions, into the folds of lives that may never know Evan's face, but felt her hand resting on the space beside them. She gave the box to Liam. He cataloged every page, made copies for the local museum, placed the originals in a glass case beside Evans's journal, now sealed for preservation. They called the new exhibit Still Seated. People visited, they read, they sat. More schools joined, more chairs appeared, and in time, the term Booth 6 wasn't just a noun. It was a verb, a verb for presence, for listening, for the still, deliberate act of staying. "I'll booth 6 with you," someone would say in a cafeteria. "Want to booth 6 this moment?" a teen would whisper to a classmate having a bad day. And just like that, Evans, without trending, without a movie, without a monument, became something far greater. She became a shared behavior, a ritual, a quiet revolution in public spaces, all because she sat, and others chose to sit too. Years down the road, a college professor introduced Booth 6 as part of her freshman orientation. Not just the story, but the seat itself. In every dorm lounge, a single chair was tagged with a small wooden sign. "This is a Booth 6 seat. You don't need to fix anything. Just sit. Just stay. Just see." The students didn't understand at first. Some thought it was symbolic. Others thought it was strange. But during finals week, the chair was always full, sometimes with 2 people, sometimes with someone sleeping next to it, just needing to be near the idea that somewhere in the world, empathy was real. One RA started logging every time someone sat there. She didn't collect names, she collected moments. 9:12 a.m., a girl sobbing quietly. A boy sat beside her. They didn't talk. They just shared a silence. 11:40 p.m., 2 students who had just broken up sat back to back, stayed for 20 minutes, left separately. 3:17 p.m., no one sat, but someone placed a folded drawing on the seat. It read, "You're not broken, just tired." At the end of the year, she wrote her final paper on Booth 6. Her professor cried when she turned it in, not because it was perfect, but because it meant the next generation had learned not just to read the story, but to live it. Back in Evans's hometown, the original diner still stood. Booth 6 remained untouched, its laminate smoothed by the weight of thousands of elbows, its cushion worn at the edges but firm where it mattered. Visitors still came, some expecting a monument. What they found instead was a table, 2 seats, and a single line etched into the wall above. "Start here." That was the final message the town chose to give. No plaque about Evans, no long biography, just the invitation to listen, to stay, to carry the story forward, one seated moment at a time. In a quiet corner of Norway, inside a rehabilitation center for wounded peacekeepers, a woman named Sissel read about Booth 6. It came to her not through a formal program, but in a letter. From a Marine she had met during an exchange program years ago. Enclosed was a translated article, a photo of the booth, and a handwritten message. "You told me once that healing needed more than medicine. I think this is what you meant." Sissel read it twice. Then she walked to the common area, found an unused table, and wrote on a card, "Detta et Booth 6 board. Du trenger ikke forklare, bara vær." Translation, "This is a Booth 6 table. You don't need to explain, just be." She taped it to the edge. No one said anything that day, but by the end of the week the table was always occupied. 2 veterans shared coffee there every morning at 7. A nurse sat there during her lunch break, waiting for anyone who needed quiet. Someone added a second chair, then a third. By the end of the month, someone placed a framed photo of Evans between the salt and pepper shakers. No words, just her face. Strong, still, familiar. The staff didn't ask who did it. They just added a fresh flower each Monday. The story had crossed oceans now, not because it was loud, because it was true, because it gave people something they hadn't dared believe was still possible in a fractured world. The right to be seen without performing, and the safety of a seat beside someone who stayed. The ripple finally reached a war zone. In an active conflict zone overseas, a makeshift operations tent stood at the edge of a shattered village. Dust coated everything, helmets, boots, cots, hearts. But even there, someone had written it, in permanent marker, on the back of a supply crate used as a bench. Booth 6, Sit beside someone. No plaque, no ceremony. Just black ink on wood and the hush that followed. It was a medic who'd written it. She'd read about Evans during a long redeployment flight, scrolling through a bootleg PDF of The Man Who Got Back Up. When she landed, the first thing she did, before unloading gear, before grabbing chow, was drag that crate into the shade of a crumbling wall and write those 4 words. And slowly it began. A private with shaking hands after a raid sat there. A translator who'd lost his home sat beside him. A chaplain who didn't preach but knew how to listen pulled up an ammo can and stayed an hour. By the end of the month, the Booth 6 crate, as it came to be known, was part of the base map. Command never questioned it. One officer told a reporter, "We've got protocols for almost everything. That bench, that's our protocol for not letting someone fall apart alone." Back home, no one knew about the crate. But the medic who started it eventually did something she never thought she would. She wrote a letter to Booth 6's original town. "You don't know me, but your story reached us. It held a man together. It kept a translator from quitting. It made me believe that presence is the only real medicine." Evans sat once. We're still sitting. The letter was framed and placed beside the original mural, and for those who passed by each day, walking dogs, sipping coffee, pulling strollers, it was a reminder that the seat they passed had outlived its origin. Because it had outloved it, too. And now it sat in dust, in light, in silence. Anywhere someone brave enough to stay chose to sit. The museum in D.C. updated their exhibit. 10 years after Evans' story was first archived, a curator named Jada, who had once sat at a Booth 6 replica in her college cafeteria, proposed a new expansion. She called it the Booth Network. It wouldn't be an exhibit, it would be an invitation. They gathered letters from across the world, stories from classrooms, airports, hospital waiting rooms, combat zones, rehab centers, and even prison libraries. Anywhere someone had chosen to sit beside instead of look away. The new wing was interactive. There was no glass between you and the stories. You sat in a booth. Next to you was a screen. When you tapped it, a story played, not acted, just real voices, real moments. I was the only girl in my class with one hand. A boy sat next to me for a week, didn't ask a thing. He just made room. My son didn't come home from his 3rd tour, but someone from his unit sat with us after the funeral. Just sat. Didn't talk. And that made the house feel less like it was caving in. I was homeless. Someone handed me a coffee and sat down on the curb. I don't remember his name. I remember the warmth. After the story played, the screen went dark. Then 3 words appeared. "Now it's yours." Visitors left notes. Some were full of gratitude. Some were apologies. Some were only one sentence. "I see you. I'm still here. I'm sorry I didn't sit." Jada never met Evans, but she wrote a piece for the museum wall. Evans didn't change the world. She reminded it how to remember itself. And in every corner where someone makes space, she sits again. By year's end, the Booth Network had reached 46 countries, not because it was marketed, because it was shared. And it stayed small enough to feel sacred, but wide enough to hold the weight of 1,000 stories, and counting. On the 25th anniversary of Booth 6, the town held a gathering. They didn't call it a ceremony, they called it a seat at the table. No banners, no stage, no microphones, just tables set up in the park. Mismatched chairs, mismatched people. Every table had one empty seat, marked with a simple sign, "For the person who still doesn't know they belong." People came from everywhere. Some drove for hours. Some flew in. Some walked from the diner across the street like they always had. Former Marines, teenagers with notebooks, parents with toddlers, teachers, janitors, nurses, widows. They didn't ask who anyone was, they just sat. And when they were ready, they told stories. A man who used to mock his brother for needing therapy said he'd now become a counselor. A teenage girl who once hid her leg under sweatpants now taught swim lessons with her prosthetic uncovered. A diner waitress said she kept a drawer of blank note cards behind the register because sometimes the best service was letting someone write something they couldn't say out loud. Toward the end of the evening, as the sun dipped low and the string lights blinked on, Kyle stood up, not to speak, to carry something forward. He walked to the middle of the park, placed a new bench under the tree where Evans used to rest after walks, and nailed in a small plaque. It said, "This seat is taken," by everyone who showed up after. Liam placed a book beside it. Inside were blank pages. The cover read, "Continue." And people did. They filled it with drawings, letters, one-line thank yous, signatures, even a poem left by a child in block letters. "You sat," they saw. "Now I sit and I see." No one left right away, because no one wanted to be the one who left a seat empty. Not now, not ever again.